predictions and opinion. And due to various logistical issues and people not dialing in, it looks like I'm on my own this evening. So if you're on the live chat, then do say hi and drop me some comments. What I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be running through the previewing the Rugby Championship, having a quick look at the different sides, what the format of it is, what that all kind of means, what each team will be trying to get out of it, heading towards the Rugby World Cup. Hopefully, we will have Herman dropping in when he gets on, and then we will kick off, and then he'll join us on the chat. Before we get on to that, though, a couple of little news items along the way. Josh Strauss is moving to the Blue Bulls, heading down there. Obviously qualified for Scotland, but born in South Africa, and so heading home there. I guess he's not expecting to make the Rugby World Cup squad, and hence that's why he's got released a year early from his 3-year contract. But yeah, all the best for him, obviously, down there in South Africa. As I say, he's heading down there a year early. He was playing for Scotland in November, and in all honesty, I think that for Scotland, they should be thinking about winning the Rugby World Cup, not about what's happening post Rugby World Cup. So if he's good enough, he should get a shot. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see what Gregor Townsend decides. Congratulations to England's men and women who have now qualified for the Olympics Sevens in Tokyo, which means that Team GB will be going. Remember, Canada men also qualified the other weekend as well out of the Americas competition. So we're starting to get to see those teams that are going to make it, in addition to the 4 from both the men and the women who made it via the HSBC World Series. And finally, there has been a scrum law change, which is one that I think a lot of us found really confusing to read, because yeah, it talks about stuff that most of us don't, or the wording of it wasn't clear to most of us as to what they were referring to. But what it basically is talking about, though, is players putting their head onto the opposition's shoulder, and therefore putting all of the weight of all 8 players through their neck onto that person's shoulder, which disrupts his setup. Now that really clearly is a dangerous thing to do. It's not safe to have all of them going through, but they use something about axle, something or other, rather than just saying, hey, players aren't allowed to put their head against the opposition's shoulder, which would make it much clearer. Rugbyreferee.net did that and have made a much more simple way of understanding what is going on there. So yes, slight law change. It's it's gone straight into being effective straight away rather than being trialled or anything. But as we're talking about players' necks, clearly that's really not a safe thing to do, and so hence, from a safety point of view, I fully understand why they have gone through with that and put it straight into law. So yes, well, another one for commentators to not really understand going when a referee decides what he's going to do. And it starts off with a free kick, then goes penalty for repeat, and obviously just like any other infringement, that can also go to yellow cards for repeats as well. So I say a new technicality around the scrum for us all to try and get our heads around and see, but it makes sense when you talk about players' necks, and that's just a crazy thing to do. Stuff that's going on, well, for those, obviously Super Rugby has now finished, as has the Gallagher Premiership, the Pro 14, the Top 14, so you'd be forgiven for thinking that basically rugby has taken a halt. But no, there is stuff going on. So for those of you in South Africa, there is the Currie Cup, both the Premiership and the Championship going on. The Championship kicked off 2 weeks ago. The Premiership kicked off last weekend. I will be putting out my predictions for that probably tomorrow. So keep a lookout on DrivingMaul.com for that. Also, we have the Shoot Shield is ongoing in Australia as well. Hugh my mate from over there has been giving us expert opinion and insights into that tournament, so look out for those predictions. Again, that'll be posted either later this evening or tomorrow on DrivingMaul.com. So both of those going on and coming up, but that does mean that basically we don't have a Mickey Mouse moment of the week. We'll get back into those with the Rugby Championship that is kicking off this coming weekend. Yes, it's a truncated Rugby Championship, just 3 rounds this time, so half the size of a normal Rugby Championship. Each of the sides then will be playing one more game against Rugby Championship opposition as part of the warm-up, so Australia and New Zealand will play an extra game, and South Africa and Argentina will. So they're basically playing 4 games. Only the first 3 count towards the Rugby Championship this time around. Not only that, but also it's got an interesting kind of structure, because normally what happens is they play 2 games in kind of similar time zones, so in sort of Australia, New Zealand, and then 2 games in South Africa, Argentina, and then they basically switch around and have a week's gap for travel. That's not going to happen this time. So what's happening this time is next weekend we have a game in in South Africa and in Argentina, and immediately the following weekend we have games in Australia and in New Zealand, which means obviously the travel is going to be a much bigger factor in this Rugby Championship than it is for most. We then have a week's break before we have the final round of games. So 2 weekends, a break, then the final weekend of games is the kind of structure of it. And that's going to impact how some of the teams are deciding on selecting their squads for these first 2 rounds of games. Some of the coaches have even gone so far as to say that actually these first 2 rounds of games are about getting the players back in the environment and the performances, and they're not so much worried about the actual results. We'll see whether that's really true or not, because let's be honest, no team ever likes to lose. So I'm not sure if you can really say that. It's Steve Hansen that's come out and said that he's not actually concerned about the results for the first 2 games, but for the Bledisloe, he is concerned about the results. Now, I can't see the All Blacks ever going into a game not wanting to win. I think Dane Coles, just saw him on the news, talk about the fact that he was part of the first team to ever lose to Ireland. He doesn't want to be part of the first team that ever loses to Argentina. So you've got to say that the players aren't going to want to lose. It also is a great opportunity for a lot of players here for that. So I'll go through each of the teams, have a quick chat about what I think they want to get out of the tournament, and also what their expectations from the fans and stuff is as well. So first up, Argentina. So let's go alphabetically. Now, their opening game is against New Zealand this weekend over in Argentina. They follow that up with a game in Australia against the Wallabies in Australia, and then fly over to South Africa for a game in fly back to Argentina for a game against South Africa before flying to South Africa for a game against the Springboks. Now, that's a lot of travel for this Argentinian side. Let's be honest, a lot of the squad will have been in Christchurch for the Super Rugby final. They had to fly back to Argentina, play to play this game against New Zealand, then fly back to Australia, then fly back to Argentina. They'll be bouncing backwards and forwards quite a lot, and you've got to wonder at which point they are going to start resting players, and which players they decide to run out for this. Also, there are 4 overseas stars that have been overseas-based players that have been named in the 30 for to face the All Blacks. Those including Nicolas Sanchez, who is obviously a fly half for Stade Francais. We have Santiago Cordero, the Toulouse loose forward. The Bordeaux wing. Toulouse loose forward is Facundo Issa, and then we have the tight head prop Juan Fiaglio as well. So you got to say that I would think all those players will be put into the matchday squad as quickly as possible to reintegrate them to this side. All the other players, being Argentinian based, will have been part of the sort of Jaguares training squad to a greater or lesser degree. I think probably all been part of the training squad, so they'll all be used to playing with each other. It's just looking at how does the change of coach, how does Ledesma want them to play for Argentina? Is it that different than they play for the Jaguares? You wouldn't have thought so. You'd think he'd been working with the Jaguares set up pretty closely, and so that things will be heading all in the same direction. So you've got to say that that you'd expect all those players to be involved, if not starting, then coming off the bench. At the very least, Agustin Creevy takes up the captaincy mantle after he also hasn't been captaining the Jaguares, so that'll be he'll be captain for the Jaguares. Now, what are we looking at for them in this rugby championship? You've got to say that they're looking, having had that game against the Crusaders, having beaten the Chiefs at home, are they looking at potentially getting their first win against the All Blacks this coming weekend? Clearly, or are they going to look at resting players and use it for integration? I think they'll probably rest players and use it for integration, and that players that perhaps started in that final in Christchurch will. I'm not saying they'll all be rested by any stretch, but if I were if I were Ledesma, I would be looking at considering resting the players who got through the most workload during the Jaguares, and look at using this really to get the 4 foreign players integrated back into the setup. So we could see some rustiness between Sanchez and his scrum half and centres, for example, and things like that. So will this one, at the end of the day, this isn't the goal for the Jaguares, for the Pumas. Everyone's goal this year is about the Super Rugby World Cup. So Super Rugby World Cup, about the Rugby World Cup, not about the Rugby Championship. So for them, I think this game is about integrating those players. So they back up then with the game against the Wallabies in Australia before those home and away games against South Africa. Now, all the team. So for me, you'd be looking at trying to get the upper hand on the Wallabies, definitely getting and start the winning streak from there. Obviously, all the players will be motivated to go out against the All Blacks, but look, they've never beaten the All Blacks. This would be their first. So you don't want to set the expectation, we'll win the first one and move on from there. I think they'll be looking at winning the Australia game and moving on from there. Their only Rugby World Cup warm-up game is that one against South Africa. They haven't got another game before the Rugby World Cup, which to me it feels like they should probably have one more game in there. New Zealand, for example, will be playing Tonga as an extra game. South Africa will be playing Japan for an extra game. The Wallabies don't have an extra one in there either. I don't know if they've got one that's just not been announced yet, or not been, or they're finalising plans for an extra game. But I would have thought that both Argentina and Australia would want an extra game between now and the Rugby World Cup. But let's wait and see. So for me, I think they'll be gunning for three wins. From this, looking at South Africa and trying to beat South Africa at home and away. Obviously, that away game will be really tough. So I think 2 out of 4 is kind of what will be a power performance for the Jaguares, for the Pumas, which obviously sounds very. It's very positive for a side that previously, that historically sort of comes is the weakest of the Rugby Championship sides. Looking at Australia and listening to a lot of Australian comments, they've been very happy about the squad that has that's been selected. There's a few surprises in there. So Phipps, for example, not being selected. Ned Hannigan not being selected. So it wasn't just purely a Waratahs based selections. Players like Joe Powell, who have been playing well, comes in. Rob Valentini, Liam Wright, both guys with. And Ethan Nasrani, 3 loose forwards with no caps. Joe Powell's only got 4, and Nick White comes back in to the fold, having been overseas at the Exeter Chiefs, taking the Exeter to the final of the Gallagher Premiership, playing very well. So Tom Banks in there with only 3 caps as well. So there are players being picked on form, not just players for experience. And that does mean, though, things like you've got Tolo Latu, Fainga and Lacey as the 3 hookers with 12, 7 and 2 caps. That's not much experience at all in that department, is it? Let's be honest. You've got to say that some question marks there for Checker, a bit like I've had question marks for Eddie Jones around how they've gone around building their squad for the past 4 years, or the past three and a half years, heading towards this Rugby World Cup. You shouldn't be leaving yourself with a combined 21 caps across across your 3 hookers. That really shows a lack of planning there. Now, I don't mind the odd player coming in that's on form, such as Valentini, who I've been very impressed with this Super Rugby. I thought this season he was doing very well, and Joe Powell coming back in with just those 4 caps. So those players I don't mind, but it's when all the players that you have in that position are low caps. Clearly, the lack of Folau and the issues that have happened there mean that you kind of expect it. So that kind of thing you can't legislate for, or you can't plan for, shall I say? And so I wouldn't be critical in that situation. But then they've got Tom Banks. I mean, Daniel Helpers has been playing well there, and whilst players like Curtly Beale might be named as a centre, and Reece Hodge, both those players can play fullback as well. So, to my mind, that's some of the sort of stuff that you've got to look at. But overall, I think people have been happy that what we've seen here is Checker moving away from just that purely Waratahs-based side. Heading over to South Africa now. It's really interesting to read what South Africa have said, and we'll also be looking at them. Well, I'm doing South Patrick Lauder, so I would be looking at them last. But so it'll be interesting to see how Australia approach that game. I've not heard that they're splitting and they're squad in the same way that, say, the Springboks and the All Blacks are. So to me, having heard the news from the Springboks, you've got to say that Australia have got to go into that one looking to win that game in South Africa, because all the South Africa the Springboks talking about only 15 players ahead of not involved in this game, ahead to New Zealand for the All Blacks test, and they've said that those 15 will be the players who are the most automatic choices for those positions. So basically, removing the first choice lineup for the Springboks, it's going to be a second choice lineup against Australia. So Australia got to go into that game with a very positive attitude. They then play Argentina at home. Now, whilst I've said that I think Argentina should be gunning for that win and should be looking at those 2 wins, Australia at home should be expecting to beat Argentina. And so you've got to say Australia should be coming out of this with 2 wins before they have New Zealand at home. Now, I've not actually checked, but I'll just quickly check now as to the way the Rugby Championship goes. But I do remember that 4 years ago it was Australia that won that. New Zealand tend to not win the Rugby Championship during in a Rugby World Cup year. So so back in 2015, Australia won it. Back in 2011, Australia won it. Now New Zealand did win in 2007 and in 2003. And 2, 3, 4, and in 1999. So they were winning it before then, but for the last 2, Australia have won the Rugby Championship during Rugby World Cup years. And that's the only time New Zealand haven't won it. Since 2010, New Zealand have always won the Rugby Championship, except for in Rugby World Cup years. So come that Bledisloe Cup game, Australia versus New Zealand. Hansen has come out and said those 2 Bledisloe Cup games, they're looking at winning. They're not looking at sort of winning and losing, or losing and winning like they did back in 2015. So it's going to be interesting how that goes. But Australia should be looking at starting this the Rugby Championship with 2 wins. Now, clearly, both Australia and Argentina can't do that. Can't meet the expectations. One of them is going to fall below, but that's got to be what Australia are aiming for. the games against New Zealand are going to be very tough. The Bledisloe Cup is again that's going to be very tough, and historically they have lost both, or have lost only won one of those games. I can't see them. If New Zealand are gunning for those, then there's a good chance. But Australia will lose both. But you got to say Australia will be gunning for at least got to be aiming for 3 wins out of their 4 games before the Rugby World Cup, potentially winning all 3 in the Rugby Championship with that home game against New Zealand. 2, I think, will be okay out of these 4. If they don't get 2 wins, then the Australia are really going to be heading in a very low morale, heading towards the Rugby World Cup. Moving on to New Zealand, yes. Initially, the talk was that there'd be no Crusaders players travelling to Argentina. So basically, basically anyone who was in the Super Rugby final would be rested. In the end, the 3 outside backs in Bridge, Rees, and I got blank, and all will be travelling with the team to Argentina. There are 3 players who have not had much or any time at all in the All Blacks setup. So unsurprising that Steve Hansen wants to get them in there and see them as much as he can prior to as he can in this process. Other issues that the All Blacks have had is Bowden Barrett and Artie Spare in particular being sick, and didn't travel initially up to Auckland. Geordie and Omua were both quarantined as well for a while because they were sick as well. So a bit of a definitely disrupted run up to this Rugby Championship. They play Argentina away, South Africa at home, and then Australia away. And you'd expect Steve Hansen has already said he's not worried about the results in those first 2 games. And I think he's trying to play as many, if not every single player in the squad to give them a run out to see how they are going. Obviously, if someone disappoints on the training paddock, they won't get a look in, but I think otherwise he'll be looking at trying to see them all and then take those 2 Australia games, the 2 Bledisloe Cup games very seriously as well, and then have the Tonga warm-up because they're playing Tonga in Hamilton prior to the Rugby World Cup as the last Rugby World Cup warm-up game. And in that one, I think that'll be for a lot of the fringe players in that one. But expect the first choice teams to be running around against the Wallabies in both those games. New Zealand, look, they should be looking at 5 wins out of those 5 games. Let's be honest. Now they did lose in Wellington to South Africa last year, and South Africa have said they're sending their first choice 15 over early for that game. So that is obviously going to be a tough game. Having rested a lot of players, such as Kieran Reid, Cody Taylor, Richard Mwanga, etc., for the Argentina trip, again, that's going to be a tough game. So New Zealand could lose their opening 2 games, but they've said that if they don't win those last 3, then there's going to be some real trouble, especially if the performances aren't there. I think fans' expectations will be 5 wins. Let's be honest. If they lose against Argentina badly or South Africa, then there will be a whole bunch of alarm bells going off for the fans. Maybe not for the coaches, but definitely for the fans. And they don't want that kind of media pressure going on in public. So yes, but I think Hansen's trying to play down expectations around those first 2 games. Heading into the Springboks now, they've got Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, and then Argentina at home, and then away to Japan for the Rugby World Cup. That Japan game is a game that the Springboks will want to make a statement on, particularly purely because they lost to Japan at the Rugby World Cup last year. They want to show that there's none of those sort of lingering doubts going on. So that game is a must-win for the Springboks. Looking at the rest, home to Australia, having rested your top 15 players, that's going to be a tough one. Away to New Zealand, always tough. And then those 2 games against Argentina are flying high. I think away is going to be tough. They could easily be going into they could easily go through this Rugby Championship and lose all three of those games. That would not be, that would obviously be a very bad situation for Rasmussen to be in. He'll be wanting at least 2 wins out of those 3. But what I say, I could easily see them losing all those 3 games and then needing to beat Argentina at home and needing to win that game away in Argentina. So that, but I say that Australia, they're in a mess at the moment. Let's be honest. So Springboks, even though they have rested the 15 players, should be up. Will be wanting to win that. The winning in Wellington, that's going to be a tough game. So they'll be looking, wanting to win 4 out of these 5 games, wanting to beat Argentina home and away. If they lose those first 3, there will be all sorts of pressure coming from the media, and they don't want to be in that situation. It's the reason actually that they're saying they have to split this is because that Australia apparently got first choice on the flights, and Australia are flying back on Saturday, and South Africa are flying on Sunday, which means that they don't arrive in New Zealand in time to prepare for the test match on the Saturday is what they're saying, because they can only get to New Zealand on Tuesday. So look, there's some problems there clearly, that and perhaps they could have looked at I don't know, the order of these flights or these games could have been done another way. But hey, that's how the games have been set up, and there's no getting around it now. But yeah, some question marks, I guess, of the administrators on this one. Could they have started Super Rugby a week earlier or something? I don't know. About that. Obviously, Springboks, as always, obviously got some of their foreign-based stars in there. So Vincent Koch, Elstad, Mostert. Who else we got in there? Coetzee, Francois Lowe, Faf de Klerk, Corbus Reinhard. I mean, 2 of the 3 scrum halves are from overseas, and then the one that is in Yanchis hasn't got any caps yet. So interesting choices there in the scrum half positions. Who else we got in here? So Francois Stern, there's been a lot of talk about him coming back. Obviously, 32, the veteran in this squad. Does that make him the oldest one? I think it probably makes him the oldest player in the squad, except after Shock Brits, who is 38, actually, and the Beast at 33. So even though people are talking about, wow, he's kind of veteran coming back, he's not. So there are 2 players that are older than him in the squad, and people aren't complaining about their age. Chelsea Colby from Toulouse, obviously, has been playing some great rugby, and then Willie LaRue from Toyota Verblitz in there as well. So that's the setup, or the overseas players that they have that have called in. Obviously, a very tight Super Rugby conference for South Africa, and again another team that has picked players on form. It's 3 players with no caps, another couple with just 1 cap to their name. So a lot of inexperience in this side. Not quite. At least they haven't. At least they've got more experience in the hooker position than the Wallabies do. But I say, they've got a mixture of experienced players. They've also got some inexperienced and some form players coming in as well into the side. It's going to be interesting to see who the 15 are that travel ahead to New Zealand, who are the first choice 15 players. For example, do we see Yanchis or Pollard travelling? Evening Taz, good to see you in the live chat. Do we see Yanchis or Pollard travelling to New Zealand early and get there's only 2 fly halves in the squad. So it'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. You've got to look at say there are some great outside backs, particularly going through in South Africa: Dante, Colby, Dylan Lades, Mapimpi, Nkosi, Gallant. Then you realise that she's got 7. So Dante's 13, 7, 9, 4, 6, 5 caps. The only guy over 20 caps in there is Willie LaRue, 52. A lot of really good players, but not experienced at Test level in there. And if I actually look down the list, the guys with over 50 caps, you're looking at obviously the Beast with 107, Eben Etzebeth 75, Francois Lowe with 65, and Francois Stern with 56, and then Wheeler on 52. Not many players with that many. Now, if we compare that to, say, the New Zealand side, I'm sort of bringing up that that now as to how they've gone about building their squad for this Rugby World Cup. You look at Dane Coles, Owen Franks, Brodie Retallick, Sam Whitelock, Sam Kane, Kieran Reid, TG Perenara, Aaron Smith, Bowden Barrett, Sonny Bill Williams, and Ben Smith. All those players with over 50 caps in there. Now, there are a bunch of inexperienced players who are there on form as well. Players like Reese, Bridge, Enor, just 1 cap between those 3. Brad Webber's only got 1 cap. Josh Ioane hasn't got any, but he's in there because of injury to Dane McKenzie. Even Rich Mwanga's only actually got 9 caps to his name. So there is a bunch of inexperience in here as well. Form players being or new players into that sort of setup coming through. But there's quite a lot of players with that 50 plus caps bringing the experience into the side. So for South Africa, as I say, those first 2, they'll be obviously be expecting to be Australia, and looking at trying to get 4 out of 5 wins, 4 wins out of their 5 Rugby World Cup pre-Rugby World Cup games, I would suggest. So there you go. That's what we're seeing in the Rugby Championship. Depending on club rugby at this weekend, depends whether I'll be able to make it to do post-match reactions straight away after the games, or whether they'll be a bit delayed for these games this weekend. But South Africa versus Australia, followed by Argentina versus New Zealand. 2 cracking games with some really interesting lineups to see. As I say, South Africa are going to be missing a whole bunch of their players. New Zealand resting all their Crusaders, except for those back 3 new ones. Argentina, will they integrate those foreign players in straight away, or will they try and put out a unit that's going to be cohesive and try and get that win over New Zealand for the morale? Who knows? And to make history, we'll have to see how all those things go. But 2 really interesting games this weekend. Please do enjoy them. It's been a bit of a short night tonight because, hey, I'm on my own, and the throat is getting sore after half an hour of constant talking. So thank you for joining me, and don't forget, subscribe, etc. I'll be back tomorrow night with Michael Pullman for the All Blacks edition, and then we'll be back on Thursday. Once we've got hopefully we'll have the lineups for these 2 games to preview these 2 games as well. So enjoy whatever you're watching this weekend, and don't forget to subscribe and all of that kind of lovely stuff.